All right, a happy late Tuesday morning if you are in the Eastern time zone here. A chilly morning across the United States, a chilly morning down here in Southwest Florida where we are hitting temperatures in the low 40s. Hopefully, everyone is doing great. We were not planning on doing a video today, but in light of Nico Harrison being let go, as Shams reported. I figured we would do something quick since this will be reported on throughout the day. I think I have NBA Today later today. We started to get wind of it last week. I was out in LA and Tim McMahon was out there. We sat next to each other during the Lakers game on Wednesday night, San Antonio, and we were watching their loss that night to New Orleans, and then they lose to Memphis on Friday, and then barely squeak out a win on Saturday against the Wizards, and then of course we know they lose at home to Milwaukee. Um, the rumblings were already starting regarding Nico Harrison's job status. They probably were starting after Luka got traded. Um, I will say this, kind of a couple different ways to go here. When you have a new ownership change, I always say this whenever there's a new ownership change, when Patrick Dumont buys a team from Mark Cuban, part of the ownership process is not the NBA gives a manual on how to run a team or how to build a roster or conduct trades. As we can say, this was baptism under fire for Patrick Dumont, who, let's face it, signed off on the Luka Doncic trade. This was not Nico Harrison going behind his back. This was an owner who was out publicly, basically claiming whether it was Luka's weight or his desire, his play on the court or his availability, that certainly the trade was made and it talked glowingly about Anthony Davis. But now when was that trade? We're about 9 months later, and this Mavericks roster is sinking right now. They're 3-8. They rank the second worst in offensive efficiency. Defensively has kind of kept them in games here. There is no Kyrie Irving, there is no Anthony Davis, and Luka Doncic is flourishing in Los Angeles. So you kind of tie all this in together, and you get certainly the public backlash that has been going on since February. You watched the game last night against Milwaukee. They're down, I think, two, and with a minute left, and there's fire Nico Harrison um, chance in that arena. And this was not going to die down, especially for a Maverick team that's had a considerably favorable home schedule um, to uh, to start this. So, as I said, you live and you learn when you're an owner. Unfortunately for Patrick Dumont, you don't get a do-over in the Luka trade here. Um, I will say this, and I guess it's kind of like, how did we get here? Well, we know how we got here. The Luka trade basically did him in, but um, Nico Harrison was hired in June of 2021. I put up a graphic, kind of all the trades they've made. They've made 16 trades since then. I would say he is probably one of the more aggressive GMs out there. I feel like whenever we wrote our trade guide, it was always about how Dallas turned their roster over. As Tim McMahon said, the only player left on the roster that he inherited was Dwight Powell. There are seven players left on that 2024 Western Conference Finals team that went to the finals and lost to Dallas. I think Powell is probably the only player left from that Mavericks team that lost to Golden State in the Western Conference Finals. An ultra aggressive general manager who is constantly looking to change the parts of the roster. For the most part, it was the parts of the roster to fit along with Luka Doncic on that team. When you look at what they've been able to do, when you trade the Porzingis trade for Dinwiddie and Bertans, the Kyrie Irving trade, which was at the time and is still at the time a good value trade. You got to get Irving back on the court when you flip Dinwiddie and Dorian Finney-Smith and a first in 2029 and 2 seconds for Irving. That was a good value trade, right? Constantly trying to change the parts of the roster. You trade for PJ Washington, that cost you a first in the Charlotte deal. You trade for Daniel Gafford from the Wizards, that cost you a first with Washington. That was in what was that in the 2023 trade deadline? I want to say. Let me just look. I'm looking at my. I am looking at my graphic. PJ and where are these guys? 2024 trade deadline. Gafford and PJ, and those guys played a big role in helping get Dallas to the NBA Finals here. I think where things started to go downhill, we can go back to the offseason of 2024 when the Klay Thompson sign and trade acquisition has turned out to be a nightmare. He is a shell of himself. He's coming off the bench. That contract, although it's in the $16 million range, is not appealing, and you still owe another year left. Letting Derrick Jones Jr. go to basically get Thompson, I believe, has backfired on them. I know Najee Marshall comes in as a replacement and is on a pretty good value deal, but the Jones going to the Clippers, and there was a lot going on there with the agent change and him going to Rich Paul, and there was a lot of different things going on that played a role. I like the Quentin Grimes trade when you acquired him from Detroit for Tim Hardaway Jr. And I did like some of the things that Dallas was able to do pre-Luka trade. Now we fast forward to February of 2025. Ironically, we have this graphic up and it's page two. Page two is what doomed Nico Harrison. When you look at the Luka trade, and we don't have to go into full detail, and I do remember going on ESPN the next morning, Sunday morning, I said, I get it. I understand from a Dallas perspective of why they made the trade and how they see about building out their roster and getting Anthony Davis and pairing him with Daniel Gafford or Derek Lively and going big. I didn't agree that basically now you say, like, well, now we have a 3 or 4 year window. Well, wait a minute. You just had a generational player on your roster that basically could have kept the window open for the next 8 years. I do understand, and having been with an organization for a long time, when, let's face it, you get tired of a player, you get tired of their work habits, you get tired of the personality. I remember when I was in New Jersey and Brooklyn with Billy King, and he had Allen Iverson in Philadelphia, and he said, like, you just deal with it. When you have a generational player, when you have a top five player, when you have an All NBA and MVP, you deal with it. You figure out how to make it work. I do understand that basically it ran its course, at least from Dallas's perspective. And Luka gets traded to the Lakers. And then the return is what the problem is when you're analyzing this trade. If you said to me today, you could have got Anthony Davis and Austin Reeves and a first or whatever, I could have said, well, maybe you could probably justify that a little bit here. But based on what the return is, and based on Anthony Davis not being available, that has doomed, or did doom, Nico Harrison. And then you look at the transformation of Luka in LA as far as where he is. I saw him last week in that San Antonio game, and he looks phenomenal from a physical standpoint here. Then you made the Quentin Grimes trade where you sent him to Philadelphia for Caleb Martin, who is not part of your rotation. And you basically had the opportunity to basically fail Martin on his physical, but you let the trade go through and you got an additional compensation. And Grimes, as we wrote in our piece on on Monday on ESPN.com. He's one of the better free agents next offseason here. He's on our all free agent or all contract team free agent group. He's been tremendous in Philadelphia. He was tremendous in the second half of this year. And people said, well, wait a minute. It's probably the games didn't mean anything. He can go out and get 25, 30 points a game. Well, now you look at things when there's better talent around him. When you get Tyrese Maxey back and VJ Edgecombe and Jared McCain and Kelly Oubre is playing better and Joel Embiid is back, and Philadelphia is 6-4 and are competitive. And Grimes is averaging 18, 19 points, and he's averaging starter minutes, but coming off the bench. That was a colossal failure. Not at the Luka level, but that was a colossal failure. So that is the track record of Nico Harrison. As I said, one of the most aggressive general managers out there. 16 trades later, and the two that happened this past February are the ones that have done him in. Of course, you cannot plan that Kyrie Irving was going to tear his ACL. But as I said, the lack of availability of Anthony Davis and what Luka is doing in Los Angeles is probably the final nail in the coffin. And for Mavericks fans out there, you got what you wanted. I want to say, well, you got what you wanted. Now it's all about moving forward and what happens next. As Shams reported, Matt Riccardi, who was actually an intern for me back in the day, and is terrific at his job. And they also have Andrew Baker there, and Michael Finley will be, I guess, co-GMs or co-GMs in the interim basis here to figure out where they are. There's no silver wand to fix what's going on in Dallas right now. You're 3-8. You got to get Anthony Davis back. Eventually, Kyrie will get back, and you can say there's injuries, but there's injuries across the league here. I mean, the Lakers are, what are they, 8-2, 9-2, and they've had a shell of their roster here. But you have Luka, who is a top 3 or 4 player, generational, on your roster. What happens next here? Well, you're kind of in a holding pattern. You would probably love to get another a point guard on your roster. You went out and got D'Angelo Russell. I don't see that as the fit for where this team is. We'll see where this roster goes when we get closer to the trade deadline. And I think that the big question is going to be, how much authority does Matt and Michael Finley have to go out and make trades when, if the plan is to bring in a different front office or a new front office here? That's going to be interesting for me. They're hard capped at the second apron. They're 1.29 million dollars below. That was because of the D'Angelo Russell signing. You are in a holding pattern financially as far as where you are. You can't take back more money in a trade. Next year, listen, they're projected luxury tax and first apron team in 26, 27. They're only 4.6 million below the second apron. That's next year. We know about the draft picks as far as what they have available. They have their own in 2026. That is a God's blessing. They can't trade that. The only tradable picks they have is the 2029 Lakers first. That's unprotected. And they have either their first in 2031 or 2032. From 2027 to 2030, they have no control over the first round, whether they owe Charlotte and Brooklyn or Houston, or there's swap rights in there, swap rights with the Thunder, and there's also swap rights with San Antonio, which could backfire. The swap rights with Oklahoma City is 28, with San Antonio is in 2030. Right now, you've got restrictions. I'm working on actually a trade guide, kind of just a work sheet. There's restrictions on Dante Exum, Kyrie, D'Angelo Russell, PJ Washington can't be traded. The players I mentioned before can't be traded until December 15th. And that is where you are with your roster. You got to get healthy. Lively's been out. Gafford's back. AD, as I mentioned. The Clay contract is sitting there. You've got for a team that we all thought had some pretty good depth, there's some dead weight on this roster here. Max Christie's been fine for you, but when you look at Powell, when you look at Martin, when you look at Thompson, There's been some dead weight as far as you got to figure out how you can get a facilitator on your roster and who is going to be the sacrifice. If I was in the front office, I would try to get Anthony Davis's value back to where it was, and I would probably look to try to move off him. You can't look at in the back what's happened in the back, especially if this is a new front office or even if Matt or Michael Finley are there. You can't look at what you did in the past, and that's what Patrick Dumont said. Like, listen, it already happened. I'm going to basically go with a different front office or a different general manager. The Luka trade happened. You can't do anything about it. But how do you go about fixing and figuring out how to make this team better in the short term and the long term. So if it was me, I would probably look out to move off Anthony Davis, who's got 3 years left. He's got a player option in 2027, 54 million. It's a big number. It's a big number for a guy that can't stay healthy. So that is it. Nico Harrison is out. We will talk soon. We'll probably have something up today on ESPN.com. Have a good day. Try to post at what I look like. Keep them going, try to wear, I pull up long range. Jimmy with the heat, I'm on fire. It's NBA on the ESPN.